Welcome to Reddit Aliens. Serious. What is the scariest, most unexplainable thing you've come across in the woods? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Me and a friend of mine heard some weird, almost Celtic chanting when taking a walk through the woods as if someone was sacrificing a cow. I wanted to investigate, but he almost shit his pants, so we just rushed home before it was too dark. I was 11, exploring the woods with my bro when we came across a small clearing with a red and white checkered picnic blanket that had a skinned, bloodied, chopped up animal carcass on top, baking in the sun. Have you ever come across something out of place in the deep woods? I found a husked, burned out car once. A few years ago, when I was on holiday in Germany, I found a small black Nike bag. It was hanging on a tree in the middle of nowhere. I looked inside and there were bags of pink powder. Looked kinda like pink Play-Doh. No idea what it was. Creeped me out. I used to walk my grandparents' dog when I visited every weekend in the winter and sometimes in the summer until after 8th grade, since they were too old to walk her for very long. Most of our walks were through the woods. Molly, the dog, and I would always go for a long walk, maybe an hour or so. There was one clearing that I liked to visit deep in the woods since it had a lot of branching paths, and the clearing had moss that was firm enough to comfortably take a rest on. Anyway, we went down one of the less worn trails one evening. I remember it leading to a lot of pine trees, small hills, and a rubble pile near the end that served as a landmark. At some point, we must have taken a wrong turn, since I didn't know where we were, and normally we would have passed the rubble heap by then. I stopped for a minute and looked around to figure out what to do next. The sun was low in the sky. There were pine trees as far as I could see, and it was quiet. Too quiet. It occurred to me that the woods were never quiet, since it was in a neighborhood and there was always an animal or two walking around. It was summer, so there also would have been at least one bird around. Being a lake town, there was also usually wind. After realizing that it was oddly quiet, I'd also realized that it felt like I was being watched. Being an underdeveloped 11-year-old, I didn't like that. To further my suspicions, Molly started to tug on her leash back the way we came. She never did that. Listening to my gut, I checked ahead of the trail one more time before going back the way I came, occasionally looking back. After a certain point, I started to hear rustling that wasn't coming from Molly and I, at which point we started running. I didn't stop running until we reached the clearing again, and the rustling stopped too. I could hear birds again, and the wind was also blowing. Molly and I walked back to the house at a normal pace, and everything was normal after that. On subsequent trips, I'd take the trail off the beaten path with family or by myself once I finally hit puberty, in hopes of figuring out how I got lost that one day, but it was always a straight shot over hills and through the trees to the rubble pile. Scariest being a distillery of some kind. I don't know if it was drugs or moonshine, but everyone knows it's really dangerous to happen upon someone's shine. If they're stilling in the woods, then whatever they're doing is illegal. People have been known to get killed for coming across and still. I used to play in the woods with my friends all the time when we were in 7th and 8th grade. One day we discovered a new trail that went really deep into the woods. We loved exploring new trails, so we had no qualms about going down this one. We had no idea what it was we'd found, so we spent a good long time looking at everything, touching everything, and then we found guns. Just two. One was a handgun, the other was some kind of large semi-automatic, and it scared us. We then heard voices in the trees and took off into the woods where there was no trail. We just wanted to get out of there. I never told my parents, but one of my friends told their parents, and a couple days later, the woods were raided and 3 men were arrested. That's how we learned it was a still. Wish I could remember what kind it was. My dad used to live on a farm in the middle of nowhere. He had a huge piece of land that used to have an old farmhouse that got burnt down a long time ago. They had a medium-sized section of woods on the land, and nearby the entrance to the woods, it took a turn. There was a small graveyard with the family of the farmers who used to live on the land, maybe 200 or so years old. There was another small section of woods that separated another older section of the graveyard, don't know why. One day, I was exploring as I used to love to do. My favorite was finding my way to the graveyard and then to explore further from there. Middle of the day I went, with the dog. I looked toward the section of the woods that separated the two graveyard areas, and I saw this huge figure, like a human, but really, really tall. Too tall to be a human. It was also bright, and this thing was pitch black, like it didn't even have any shadow or depth to it. It was just black. The dog barked at it. It looked like it shifted in my direction, and I ran like hell. Didn't look back, just ran. When I was younger, I lived on the road for a couple of years, traveling with my girlfriend. One night, we were camping in Covello in Northern California. As soon as the sun went down, my girlfriend freaked out and started saying, "We shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be here." I couldn't calm her down, so we packed up and left. We had been together for several years, and I'd never seen her act like that. A couple of weeks later, we were talking with someone in Mendocino, and he told us about that place's history. Apparently, it had been the site of a massacre of more than 1,000 Native Americans. This is gonna sound stupid, but bear shit. I live in a pretty well-populated area, but not super packed. I was exploring this stretch of woods that no one really knows how to get into, so it was like my little spot. I was just walking, looking for deer or fox tracks, when I came across black bear tracks, and then a pile of scat. I knew we had black bears in my state, but never came across tracks, let alone fresh ones, in this part of the state. I got pictures and noped the hell out. I know if I happened to cross paths with one, I would be fine since black bears are usually not aggressive unless a mother, but it still shook me a little. A pile of dead cattle pieces, mostly heads. Now I understand that might be the sort of thing a farmer or rancher discards, but if you own them in the first place, don't you have enough land for your own corpse pile? And why and how did you effing get them there, in the middle of the woods? There's no roads. Did you have a trailer on a quad just to put these things there? I was camping with my father and 3 of his friends. Me and one other were awake. We heard a noise kind of like a gunshot. I almost had an effing heart attack. We woke them and we searched the area within a 500-meter radius and found nothing. We just stayed awake the whole night after that. In the morning, we found out that apparently someone had the idea to go effing night hunting. When I was 5, I was living in Tennessee near some woods. My brother and I loved to explore and see what we could find. One day, we found an electric chair in a small clearing that looked like one of the ones from old cartoons. This thing had wires hooked up to metal cuffs or arm bars, a headset sitting in the seat, and a bucket at the base of the chair. Obviously, it wasn't connected to anything, and there weren't any buildings or signs of any kind of past development. We ran home, and our parents called the cops. Our parents never told us what happened after that. Scariest was getting woken up from my drunken slumber car camping by about a dozen raccoons fighting over the bag of chips we accidentally left on the picnic table. I swear my heart rate jumped to about 180 beats per minute hearing those demonic snarls. I grew up in the woods down a long dirt road. I was about 14 and walking with my girlfriend at the time, about 20 years ago. And we both saw an animal moving strangely down another branched off road a couple 100 feet away. Not too far to mistake what we saw, but not close enough to get a super good look at it. At first I thought it was a baby deer, but then we realized it wasn't walking like a deer. It definitely had paws. It looked like a maned wolf with a comically long legs, but was the same light brown as a deer. Maned wolves are not in this area at all, and it moved almost feline-like. Thinking back now, it could have possibly been a bobcat, but the weirdest part was the feeling I got, a feeling of pure dread when I saw it. This is a public service announcement. If you find anything really odd in the woods or anywhere, take a picture or a video. We would all love to see it. I've been waiting for this. Okay, so for background, I live in Utah and fairly close to the mountains. I was at work, and my friend wanted to drive around like we do almost every night. We have a route that we take that goes up Big Cottonwood Canyon, a dense forest, and we always go up to his cabin on a long dirt back road. Well, I couldn't drive around with him this night, so he took the route with a girl and him, and they went up to his cabin. They said after they were hanging out, and once it was dark, they left the cabin and went to the car. The walk to the car is about half a mile because of the deep woods. Oh, and also, when it gets dark, it is pitch black. So, they were walking to the car, but there was barely any light left from the sky, and they saw a big black figure walking on 2 legs, and when it saw them, it ran, and they said they've never seen something that tall run that fast in their lives. Of course, I believed them, but not 100%. I kind of believed them because of how scared and real their emotions were with the story. So in the daylight, all three of us went back up to the cabin to see if we could find anything. Once we got up there, we found a trail of huge foot tracks. I'm a size 13 in men's shoes, and they were at least double my feet size. There were distinct toe prints and a whole foot outline. The steps were very far apart from each other, probably about 6 feet or so. Ever since then, I 100% believe their story. It was my first mountain ascent. The peak was 1,500 meters, and I was young, very naive, and unprepared for the hike. I basically put on some old Nikes and jeans and thought it was all right. I was also a heavy smoker at the time. It was an organized tour, and there were about 20 people in the group. I was placed in the weak part of the group, but eventually after 4 hours, I got to the peak. Then our group leader told us we can slowly descend at our own pace by ourselves, and we would meet at the base camp. By that time, I was physically dead and couldn't catch my breath, so I decided to descend. Eventually, I'd lost sight of other people, but the trail down was very obvious, and I felt confident I could make it on my own. I remember that I needed to cross the river through a tiny wooden bridge and then go straight down the river until I reached the base camp. For some reason, I crossed the river, but I didn't go straight down the bank and went deeper into the woods. After an hour or so, I realized that I'm lost and I don't know where to go. I started to panic. I decided to turn back, but at that point, I was in a very bushy area and I forgot where to turn and couldn't see my path. So I turned around and I saw my dog that died 1 year ago. He was still very chubby and very much happy to see me and wagging his tail. So I followed him and he brought me back to the river where I stumbled across a man who looked like a poacher with a rifle and stuff. He told me that if he showed me the right way to the base camp, I was never to mention seeing him to anyone. I gladly agreed. Then the man showed me the way, went into the bushes, and disappeared. My dog followed me for some time, but once I saw other hikers, he was gone. I'm pretty sure it was exhaustion and oxygen deficiency, so I basically started hallucinating, and in a moment of panic and fear, my mind created an image of something that calmed me down and gave me hope, which was my dog. I'm still confident that man was real. However, some more experienced hikers told me that the mountain spirits tried to kill me for being audacious and disrespectful in my Nikes. Nothing unexplainable, but a red fox's scream will damn near make you fall out of a deer stand. Sounds a lot like a woman screaming, and most people that think they heard a cougar most likely actually heard a red fox, at least in this part of the world. I lived by a walking trail in the woods once. The trails went on for miles. The middle trails always gave me a strange feeling. Out of the corner of my eye, I always would see a figure darting around. I told myself it was always a random dog or something. My husband walked with me a few times and I never said anything. But when we got in the middle, I noticed he was more alert. The trail outskirts always had activity, but it seemed everyone silently avoided the center. When I was 11, my best friend and I decided to go build a fort in the woods when it was snowing. Her house was out in the country in the middle of nowhere. We went too far and got lost. I'm not sure how long we were lost, probably 3 or 4 hours, long enough for her parents to call the cops. At one point, we saw a little house, more like a shed, with a chimney and smoke coming out of it. Literally nothing else was around but dense woods. We were terrified and ran for what seemed like forever. We eventually found our way out of the woods, but I'll never forget how scary and creepy coming across that little house was. Not to mention, we could have died from exposure to the weather. Walking a wooded path at dusk, after getting out of the deer stand, there was something I could hear walking step by step with me at my right. I couldn't see because of the brush. When I stopped, it stopped. No matter how long I remained paused, it didn't move. But when I started walking again, it was there, step for step. It really creeped me out. A fridge in the middle of the woods between the highway and a neighborhood. The neighborhood is known for its gang and drug activity. The fridge had several metal chains wrapped around it with massive locks keeping it shut. I didn't even bother approaching it. Whoever hauled it out there needed to do it on foot and wanted it out of sight. With friends like this, who needs enemies? I worked for a tree trimming company in Wisconsin when I was in high school. We were working at a property that happened to be just down the road from my home when I found a California driver's license in the middle of a large woods. It happened to look like a buddy of mine, so I grabbed it and kept on working. Showed it to my buddy later that week and had a laugh. I had no idea he actually kept it until about 2 years later. He was with me when I got pulled over for a headlight violation. The police asked to search the vehicle, and I consented because I had nothing to hide. They searched it while we get it back in. 5 to 10 minutes later, they flank us on both sides, guns drawn, demanding we get out of the vehicle. The dust settled, and it turns out my friend had kept the stupid ID and then chose to hide it in my glove box when we got pulled over. Completely inexplicable. Turns out the ID belonged to a man that was wanted for multiple homicides out of state. I ended up having to take the police to exactly where I found it, and they searched the woods with dogs. No idea what happened after that. My friend got a ticket for being a dumb shit. I grew up on a huge beef farm, and about 20 acres of it was wooded. My favorite thing to do was pack a lunch and go into the woods and stay all day with my dog. One day we're trampling through as usual and stumble upon a campsite at the far end of our property. There was a campfire, bedding, a tarp, and just random stuff. I ran all the way home and told my stepdad about it. He took his rifle and went to investigate. He came back and said he found nothing. I knew those woods like the back of my hand and told him exactly where to look. The next day I went back out there and he was right, nothing. How did someone hide all their stuff that quickly and disappear? So bizarre.